Yeah, I didn't have to put my teacher voice on. Everybody just kind of quieted down as I made my way to the podium. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us for our first 2025 Landmark Lecture Series. Our series theme this year is Rooted in History, and we were so happy that we had such a wonderful crowd come in person. We have a large crowd online tonight, so that's also really exciting to know. My name's Amy. I'm the Education Director here at Tudor Place, so it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. Take care of just a few housekeeping things at the start, because I know everybody's going to want to run away at the end after all of your lovely questions are answered. But everybody should have gotten a bookmark on their chair, and that lists all of our lectures for this year as part of our Landmark Lecture Series. For those of you who are viewing online, welcome to stop by our visitor center, pick up your own bookmark as well. And I just wanted to give you a heads up on some really fun events that we have coming up. We have our first Women's History Tour, which is actually going to be on March 16th here at 11 a.m. at Tudor Place. We also have one on March 30th at 11 a.m. We have our first Tudor Nights program, Seconds and Centuries, Evolution of Timekeeping, on Thursday, March 27th. It's going to be a really wonderful program. We have partnered with the Naval Observatory. So that'll be something really exciting that you won't get to experience if you just come here every day to take a wonderful tour. And then we also have in March our first ever Bookworms History Book Club reading discussion group here. That'll be a Saturday afternoon. It's not everybody read the same book. It's come and talk about your favorite history book and recommend it to other people. So that'll be a really exciting discussion if you're interested. And without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker tonight, Heather Bollinger. Heather's an independent historian based in Northern Virginia, and she served as the lead archivist at the Fairfax Circuit Court Historic Records Center in Virginia for 9 years, and most recently assists historic house museums in Georgetown, such as Tudor Place and Evermay, with researching the lives of the enslaved who labored at these sites. Heather has a Master of Library Science degree from the University of Texas at Austin, and also a master's degree in history from the University of Central Florida. She serves as an advisory board member for the Virginia State Historical Records Advisory Board and also enslaved.org. Her current career path focuses on centering enslaved people in the historical narrative through archival research. And recently, this past fall, she joined the Newport Historical Society in Rhode Island as a research assistant for the Voices from the NHS Archives project, which centers the Black and Indigenous voices of Newport using the archival record. We are so happy and grateful that Heather is here tonight to kick off our series. And without further ado, Heather Bollinger.
Okay, let me make sure my microphone is good. This is for the video. So if you don't hear me amplified, that's why it's for the streaming. So I'm going to take a sip of water. I am on the tail end of a sinus infection. So I am okay, though. Just a little dry in the mouth. So, okay. So many amazing people here tonight. So thank you all for coming. I want to thank everybody who is watching at home for being with us and being with me to tell the story of Anastacia Hepburn. Just a couple of gratitude things. I want to thank everyone at Tudor Place for inviting me to speak here today. Mark Hudson, Rob DeHart, who's our curator in the back, Amy Durbin, education coordinator, hiding in the back there, past archivists and curators like Haley Wilkinson, Yana Recco, people who helped me do research and being so helpful and encouraging as I was researching Anastacia's life. I am so excited to share Anastacia's story because she is a woman whose story has become embedded in my heart. And even though my research about her is kind of sort of over for now, although Sarah, the archivist, can tell you that it's not really, because I just found something yesterday that I have to incorporate. I think about Anastacia often, probably at least once a day, if I'm being honest. And I really just want to honor her memory and the memory of others enslaved at Tudor Place. So that being said, I think it's important to acknowledge out loud that Anastacia and her sisters and an unknown number of others who were enslaved here walked the ground beneath our feet. At Tudor Place, right next door, they climbed the stairs and walked the halls and inhabited the spaces there, seen and unseen. Anastacia, in particular, spent at least 2/3 of her very long life enslaved on this site, perhaps the longest of any single individual enslaved here. Just a quick note about Anastacia's name. Those of you who are familiar with Tudor Place and have either volunteered here or work here or have taken a tour here may have heard the name Stacia or Stacia. Stacia and Anastacia are the same person. Stacia, however, is a diminutive or a short form of the name Anastacia. So to give Anastacia the agency in death that she deserved during her life, I will be using her full first name, Anastacia, and not the nickname her enslavers gave her. That doesn't mean I won't slip up and say Stacia, because that is how the Peter family referred to her, especially in their writings. But I think it's important to use her full name, especially because in the archival records that I think would have meant something to her, she gave her name as Anastacia. Yes, it works. Okay. So in late 2023, I was asked by Tudor Place's curator, Rob DeHart, to assist on researching and updating some of the biographies of the enslaved who had lived and labored at Tudor Place as they prepared to install their Ancestral Spaces exhibit, which opened in 2024, which I hope you all got to see and experience because it was amazing and so moving. One of the individuals Tudor Place wanted more help with was a woman named Stacia. In Britannia Peter Kennan's reminiscences, Britannia recalled a few of the people who had been enslaved at Tudor Place. She said this about Stacia in 1895. The quote is directly, "Then there was Barbara, who took care of me, and Stacia." In 1904, Britannia recalled further, Stasia's sister was named Brith, and another sister whose name was Elizabeth. Father, meaning Thomas Peter, gave her to Mek, meaning America, Britannia's older sister, an excellent nurse. Captain Williams, who was America's husband, ordered to Cape Cod, took her, and she ran away. So as you can see, not much was said about Anastacia and her family at all. So much so that a relative, perhaps Armistead Peter Jr., who had written down some of Britannia's reminiscences, had written follow-up questions that he does not appear to have had answered. He wrote right here, you can see, "Was old Stacia your maid?" And he asked the same of Barbara, who was Barbara Cole Williams. And you can learn more about her in Tudor Place's website. And she and her family were included on the Ancestral Spaces tour. So what do we learn about Britannia's reminiscences? We learn that Anastacia was likely a nurse who took care of Britannia. She had a sister named Brith or Brythe or Bithy. And we're not really even sure of that name because the handwriting is a little shaky. And the name is uncommon. And that they had another sister, Elizabeth, who ran away sometime when Britannia's brother-in-law took her to Cape Cod. So while we can argue that perhaps without Britannia's reminiscences, we may not know anything about the people enslaved at Tudor Place. But yet there is this kind of glaring issue with them. It's not necessarily their truthfulness, at least not yet. It's that there are no dates, no ages, no timeframes, nothing to help us anchor Anastacia, Elizabeth, and Brith in time and space. Nothing to help us determine when exactly the sisters lived and when they were enslaved at Tudor Place. So I had my work cut out for me. So you can see here this little anecdote. That's all that Britannia had written down about Stacia, at least at this point. So the two best clues that I had was that Anastacia took care of Britannia, which means Anastacia had to have been somewhat older than Britannia, who I knew was born in 1815. Also, I knew that Britannia's sister America, Peter, had married Captain William George Williams in 1826. I could reasonably discern that the Hepburn sisters were alive and perhaps in their late adolescence to early adulthood by the time that America and William were married, since William took Elizabeth with him when he went to Massachusetts. I used this as a jumping off point, guessing that Anastacia had been born sometime between 1800 and 1810. I tried looking at sources that might yield information about enslaved people. For example, wills and inventories for Thomas and Martha Peter, who died in 1834 and 1853, respectively. Some examples of that, their two wills are on the screen here. Neither Thomas nor Martha mention any enslaved people in their wills, and they did not leave inventories of their estates. So there were no lists to be had of personal property, which Anastacia and her sisters would have been considered. I spent days on Ancestry.com and Family Search and did find that a Black woman named Anastacia Hepburn received aid from the Freedmen's Bureau in Georgetown after the Civil War, which was promising. But I had a really difficult time finding Anastacia or her sisters in any government records. Spelling differences really foiled my research, which you're going to see. I kept hitting roadblocks, which is an endless frustration for all historians who study slavery, and especially for descendants of enslaved people. So what was the breakthrough? One night, I was on Family Search looking at DC death records. I knew that Anastacia had received aid from the Freedmen's Bureau in the 1860s, so she at least lived into the 1860s or 1870s. Maybe, I thought, she lived past 1874, which is when DC officially started keeping detailed death records. I tried every combination of Anastacia Hepburn or Stacia Hepburn spelling I could think of and got nothing. In desperation, I tried Anastacia H, and this is what was returned. I don't even know how the algorithm found this record. Obviously, her name is spelled very differently than how I was spelling it, with her surname being spelled Hepburn, Hebron, not Hepburn. I audibly gasped when this popped up on the screen. Not only was there a find a grave record with an obituary attached, but it also returned her death record, recorded in Washington, D.C. in 1895. Oops, that's my pen. Ironically, Anastacia's death record and her obituary is where her story begins, because it is from these two records that I found the avenues to explore to fill the gaps in her life. I promise we will explore Anastacia's death record obituary a little bit more in depth in a little bit, because I know that some of you are out here are reading this obituary to yourselves and are saying, what? And trust me, that was my reaction too. But what I want to do right now is focus on this portion at the bottom that says she, Anastacia Hepburn, was buried today at Holyrood with Catholic rites, the society attending in a body. This sentence provides crucial evidence that Anastacia was Catholic. I should have brought a binder. I knew I should have brought a binder. Anyway. Fortunately, Georgetown University's Special Collections Library holds an amazing collection of records for Holy Trinity Church, which was founded as a Jesuit parish in Georgetown, and it was the only Catholic church in Washington, D.C. from the late 18th to the early 20th centuries. So what does this archival collection reveal about Anastacia, Elizabeth, and Brith? Records in this collection provide evidence of the Hepburn sisters' full names and that they had found community among Black Catholics in Georgetown. The Hepburn sisters can be found in a register for a Catholic confraternity for enslaved and free Black Catholics called the Sense Society. So what was the Sense Society? According to Peter J. Albert, who is a present-day parishioner at Holy Trinity Church, the Sense Society was organized in 1834. Subscribers agreed to pay a penny a week to be used for ornamenting the holy altar, tabernacle, sanctuary, and church, and to promoting the solemnity of divine worship. The names of the contributors were recorded in a ledger, and a mass was offered for all members of the society, living and dead, at least once a month on a Sunday. And the ledger was placed on the altar during that mass because it contains the names of all of the members of the Sense Society. And these are the pictures from the collection. The cover is gorgeous. I just want to comment on how gorgeous the cover is. When this came out of the box, I audibly gasped in the records room at Georgetown because it is just beautifully embossed. And it is so pretty. And it's amazing that it survives. So listed on the H index of this register, under the heading Colored Females, are three women: Tabitha Hepburn, with the word dead beside her name: Anastacia Hepburn and Elizabeth Hepburn, undoubtedly the three sisters enslaved to Thomas and Martha Peter at Tudor Place. While all three sisters were members of the Sense Society as of 1834, only Anastacia was confirmed as a member of Holy Trinity Church, her confirmation under the name Stacia Havens, Havens, being recorded on Ascension Day, 1831. The 1834 Sense Society ledger does two things. First, it gives us a date to which we can anchor Anastacia, Elizabeth, and Brith's lives. But second, the entry casts doubt on the date that Elizabeth left with Captain Williams, as recalled by Britannia, if these two Elizabeth Hepburns are one and the same. Previous historians of the Peter family and Tudor Place researched Britannia's recollection about Elizabeth further and have stated that Captain Williams was sent to Cape Cod for 10 months in 1832 and took Elizabeth with him. But this Sense Society ledger shows that Elizabeth registered as a member of the Sense Society in 1834. This entry also reveals something important about the third Hepburn sister, Brith, or Bithy, or Brythe. Her full name is Tabitha. Brith's full name, Tabitha, connects her to the birth of a son named William, recorded in the Holy Trinity Church Births Sacramental Register in 1834. At the top here, March 24th, 1834, baptized and christened William, colored in for Negro, son of Tabitha Hepburn, a slave to Mr. Peter, born in Georgetown a month ago. Sponsor Sarah Johnson. The baptism was performed by Father James F.M. Lucas. Unfortunately, we don't know anything else about William. This is the only record I found for him. Sadly, the Holy Trinity Church Deaths Sacramental Register indicates that on September 5th, 1838, Tabitha Horven, Horven, colored, a slave to Mrs. Martha Peters, age 26, was buried in TCVGY, which stood for Trinity Church Upper Graveyard, now known as Holy Rood Cemetery. She was buried in the free range plot, which was for, quote, colored people who cannot pay for the ground. The Sense Society ledger entry from 1834, documenting the sisters as members, and Tabitha, or Brith's, burial record from 1838 are the last known records for Elizabeth and Tabitha Hepburn. I spent a lot of time trying to find Elizabeth Hepburn, but found no runaway or self-emancipation ads. Nothing in military records for Captain Williams making a claim for lost personal property. Nothing that substantiates or does not substantiate Elizabeth's self-emancipation. So knowing that the document trail begins and ends for Elizabeth in 1834 and that Tabitha passed away in 1838, what could we learn about Anastacia? The Holy Trinity Church Births Register records that Anastacia gave birth to a son named Benedict in 1826. The entry reads, November 8th, 1826, Benedict, son of Samuel and Anastacia, a slave belonging to Thomas Peter, aged 6 weeks. Sponsor Catherine J. Smith. I do not know anything about Samuel, Benedict's father, except to say that he is most likely not the Samuel Hepburn. If y'all noticed a few slides back, there's a Samuel Hepburn in the H part of the Sense Society ledger. The entry as written implies that Samuel was not enslaved to Thomas Peter and perhaps not enslaved at all. Benedict, however, and his cousin William, Tabitha's son, were born enslaved to Thomas and Martha Peter because their mothers, Anastacia and Tabitha, were enslaved by them. Like Tabitha's son, William, Benedict's fate is unknown. I have not found him in any additional records connected to the Peters or to Anastacia. The Hepburn sisters' membership in the Sense Society at Holy Trinity Church during enslavement raises questions as to the Peter family's leniency toward the religious practices of the individuals they enslaved. The Peters themselves were Episcopalian, though they permitted their daughters, Columbia, America, and Britannia, to attend the Catholic girls' school in Georgetown, known today as Georgetown Visitation Prep. In addition to the records of Anastasia's confirmation, the births of her and Tabitha's sons, and Tabitha's funeral rites, the Holy Trinity Church sacramental registers record the births and deaths of additional people enslaved to the Peters. This indicates that to some extent, Thomas and Martha Peter permitted the enslaved in their household to practice the rites of their preferred faiths. This was not limited to the Catholic enslaved. Patty Allen and Eliza Gray, also enslaved to the Peters, were communicants at Christ Church, Georgetown, an Episcopal church. Practically speaking, the Peters must have permitted their enslaved to walk several blocks, as you can see by this map I've mocked up, to their respective church services, whether Episcopalian or Catholic. In the case of Anastacia, Elizabeth, and Tabitha, if they were not permitted to earn money for themselves, presumably the Peters gave the sisters pennies for their weekly or monthly tithes. Little sip. While enslaved to Thomas and Martha Peter, and later Britannia Peter Kennan, Stacia served primarily as a nursemaid, first to Martha and Thomas Peter's children, and then to their grandchildren. As an enslaved house servant and nurse, Anastacia would have been responsible for supervising the children throughout the day and night, tending to their every need. She lived at Tudor Place and was always on call, ready to respond to any sign of illness, and slept on a pallet in the hallway or other space close by, if not in a child's bedroom. Anastacia would have likely learned from an enslaved family member how to treat common illnesses before moving to Tudor Place. In 1847, Martha Peter recalled in a letter to her granddaughter, Martha Markey Custis Williams, who was the daughter of Britannia's sister America, that Anastacia had nursed Markey's brother, William Orton Williams, through a severe bout of typhoid fever, sleeping on a cot by his bedside. And I chose this artwork because it's a very close proximity, kind of, sort of, to an enslaved nurse, kind of watching the children and being in the yard and things like that. This is from Southern Virginia for the Spotswoods, but that's why I selected this. Okay. The complicated relationship between Anastacia and her enslavers and their children and grandchildren is reflected in two separate diary entries written by Martha Markey Custis Williams. As with her siblings, Markey was born at Tudor Place and would have known Anastacia all her life. And just to clarify, Markey Williams would have been Britannia's niece. So this is not to be confused with Britannia. She is not to be confused with Britannia's daughter, Markey, who married Armistead Peter. They say they kind of shared names, and they were both obviously named after Martha Custis. But so who I am talking about is actually Britannia's niece. So anyway, just clarifying that because it's confusing. Yes, so these two diary entries that were written by Martha Markey Custis Williams. As with her siblings, Markey was born at Tudor Place and would have known Anastacia all her life. In August 1856, Markey was 29 years old and living with her great uncle, George Washington Parke Custis, at Arlington House. Markey recalled after a visit to Tudor Place that month, quote, "Poor Stasia's hospitality and kindness was very touching. She told me in the kindest manner that any time I wanted to come over to town, I did not like to stay all night with any of my friends. She hoped I would come to Tudor Place. She would heartily share with me that what she had, and my room was always there, and she ready to serve me. And if I feared sleeping in the room alone, she would bring her bed and put it on the floor of my room. That anything in the world she could do for me, she was ready and would be pleased to do it." Markey Custis Williams ended the above entry noting that she told Anastacia she would come by sometime, quote, expressly to see her. In March 1859, 3 years later, Markey wrote, "A lovely day for my birthday. This morning after Orton went to the office," Orton was her brother, I went to dear old Georgetown to see poor Stacia, to whom I had long promised a visit. The getting to her abode was quite a pilgrimage, but I was fully repaid by her hospitable greeting. Over and over again did she assure me that she was so glad to see me. How strong the tie that binds one to an old family servant, one who has known you from babyhood and witnessed for all the years of your life the numerous vicissitudes of the family circle. It seemed to me a sacred duty to go see Stacia, and therefore I selected my birthday for its fulfillment. It is important to acknowledge that these diary entries reflect the paternalism inherent in the institution of slavery. Marquis Custis Williams did not see Anastacia as an equal, nor did she perceive her as a respected elder. It is possible that by the late 1850s, Anastacia was the only enslaved person remaining at Tudor Place, having lost her sister 20 years before, and with the fates of her son Benedict and sister Elizabeth unknown, at least to us, Anastacia likely felt at times very lonely. I include these entries here to demonstrate the isolation that Anastacia may have felt during her life as an enslaved woman, especially as she aged. Anastacia's whereabouts during the Civil War are unknown. Britannia left Tudor Place at the start of the war, but returned in 1862, and for fear of the house being seized, offered it for boarding to Union soldiers. It is unknown if Anastacia would or could have remained at Tudor Place during the Civil War, given the Union Army's presence, but having nowhere else to go, she likely embedded herself in the newly freed community in Georgetown. The first record of Anastacia post-Civil War is her name again in the Census Society ledger, recorded when the confraternity was reconstituted in 1865. As previously mentioned, Anastacia received aid from the Freedmen's Bureau. These records show that in December 1866, Anastacia resided in Georgetown on Frederick Street between 6th and 7th Streets and received $1 for groceries and $1.50 for fuel due to her aged condition, she being around 65 years old. About 2 weeks later, in January 1867, Anastasia's residence was recorded as Phoenix Hall, and she received an additional $3 for groceries. Finally, in May 1868, the Freedmen's Bureau recorded Anastasia's residence as Fenwick's or Phoenix Hill and received $1 for groceries. The cause of her destitution was given as sickness. Like the information recorded in the Freedmen's Bureau records, the District of Columbia city directories from 1868 through 1881 showed that Anastacia moved residences frequently, though she always remained in Georgetown, just a few blocks from Tudor Place. In August 1878, thanks to Sarah for finding this, Marquis Williams, who had recently married Samuel Powhatan Carter, wrote in her daybook that she and her cousin had gone to Georgetown to see poor old Stacia, our old servant from Tudor Place. Again, while this entry reflects paternalism, Marquis appears to have made a concerted effort to visit Anastacia, as she had nearly done 20 years before. Anastacia's specific residence between the years 1882 and 1892 is unknown. I want to explain this image I found here. It is an enslaved woman in the alleyways of Savannah. But in some ways, this is how I picture Anastacia in her later years. This image reminds me quite a bit of Georgetown in the layout. And as you'll see, I do think Anastacia was alone. And I'm not going to try to cry, but I do think she was alone in her later life. She did not have any surviving family. So this is actually kind of how I envision her after the war and when she was no longer, at least as far as we know, no longer here at Tudor Place. Though Anastacia moved frequently, one part of her life appears to have remained consistent: her faith. Anastacia joined several Catholic confraternities at Holy Trinity Church in the 1870s and remained a member of the parish until her death in November 1895. According to historian Diane Botts-Morrow, Catholic confraternities did not discriminate against members on the basis of age, sex, class, or race. However, social conventions did not permit white and Black Catholics to participate in religious services together. Morrow notes that each confraternity selected one act, such as reciting a specific prayer, wearing a certain medal, or regular assistance at Mass, as its distinguishing feature of bond or association. Such groups might also hold regular exclusive meetings or weekly rites, thus fostering a sense of bonding and cohesion. The Holy Trinity Church archives show that in addition to her membership in the Sense Society in 1834 and in 1865, Anastacia joined the Confraternity of the Rosary for Colored People and the Bonamore Society in 1875, listed as Anastacia Hebbons, Hebbons, as well as the Peter Claver Beneficial Society, likely formed in the 1870s. In the Rosary and Bonamore Societies, Anastacia, along with dozens of other African-American congregants at Holy Trinity, pledged to meditate on the Rosary, recite daily prayers, and gather weekly to discuss ministering to their communities. As stated by Peter J. Albert, quote, "The ongoing commitment we see reflected in these ledgers underscores the importance for African-American parishioners to their life of faith and their involvement in Holy Trinity's parish community." Returning to Anastacia's death certificate and obituary, they do help to shed light on the last few years of her life. Anastacia died on November 10th, 1895, at the age of 94 from senile debility and exhaustion, having suffered from illness during the last 6 months of her life. At the time of her death, her residence was given as H and 3rd Streets Northeast, Home for the Aged, where she had resided for the previous 3 years. The Home for the Aged in Washington, D.C. was established in 1871 by the Little Sisters of the Poor, a Catholic aid society run by consecrated women. Stasia's obituary provides more insight. Died old in years. Mrs. Anastacia Hepburn, Hebron, a colored servant of the Kennan family for many years, died at the Little Sisters of the Poor on Sunday in her 94th year. For the past 5 years, she has been blind. During her last days at the Kennan home, Anastacia set herself on fire several times accidentally. And Father Rockfort, who is the director of the Peter Claver Colored Beneficial Society, of which she was a member, thought it wise to have her installed at the Little Sisters home, where she would be under a constant eye. Deceased was a remarkably well-preserved woman, bearing but few wrinkles of time. She was buried today at Holyrood with Catholic rites, the society attending in a body. Anastacia's obituary raises many questions that are presently unanswerable. The obituary's author is unknown, though one can speculate that it was someone who knew her intimately, given the details included. Come on in and have a seat if we can make room up front. It is unclear what is meant by during the last years at the Kennan home, Anastacia set herself on fire several times accidentally. Specifically, when these accidents happened at Tudor Place, before or after the end of slavery, and how they occurred. At the end of her enslavement, Anastacia was well into her 60s and may have suffered from illness or injury, which made her unsteady on her feet. It is impossible to know if Britannia and Anastacia ever saw each other in Anastacia's last years of life. Perhaps not coincidentally. From February through October 1892, Britannia Peter Kennan's account books record $1 in monthly payments to Anastacia, this being the year that Anastacia entered the Home for the Aged. In 1893, 1894, and 1895, Britannia accounted for a $1 yearly donation to the Home for the Aged Colored People, the Colored People Home, and Colored People House. Anastacia was buried on November 12th, 1895 at Holyrood Cemetery at Georgetown University, perhaps not far from where her sister Tabitha was laid to rest almost 60 years earlier. At this time, I do not believe that Britannia Peter Kennan or other members of the Kennan and Peter families attended Anastasia's burial. The last known record for Anastacia comes from Holy Trinity's weekly announcements ledgers. On November 17th, 1895, 1 week after her death, during Sunday Mass at Holy Trinity Church, the Reverend asked the following of the congregation: "Your prayers are requested for the repose of the soul of Anastacia Hepburn, who died last week." Questions? And I am dropping stuff all over the floor. Yes.
One question is that earlier at the very beginning, you mentioned how you think about her at least once a day. And then while speaking about how you pictured her life in that one image of the woman going down the stairs, you got a little bit emotional. And I was wondering, what was the hardest part about researching Anastacia for you?
Okay, so I have to repeat for our folks who are watching at home. So the comment is that I got a little bit emotional trying to imagine Anastacia kind of on her own, obviously with the portrait and with her obituary and things like that. And what was the hardest part of researching Anastacia? Honestly, I think that for me, the hardest part was actually the original resource material that I was given, which is that there was this one sentence that was written about Anastacia by the woman who enslaved her for 60 years, more or less. And that is really all we knew. So I have said this to other folks, to the folks at Tudor Place. So Anastacia was born in 1801. Britannia, who lived here her whole life, and as you all know, if you've taken tours of Tudor Place, inherited the house and lived here after her mother's death in 1853, Martha Peter. And I have told this to many people, but Britannia and Anastacia walked the halls of Tudor Place side by side for 60 years. So when you're in these spaces, I can't see Britannia without Anastacia, and I really don't see Anastacia without Britannia, at least in the home of Tudor Place. So the fact that to play devil's advocate, it may have been pointed questions that Armistead Peter was asking his grandmother when talking about her reminiscences, like, "Grandma, what do you remember about such and such time?" But the fact that Stacia, she only said the one sentence about Stacia, hurts deeply because Anastacia was here the longest. And the fact that there's nothing else written. And of course, this has to do with oral histories and things like that, things that we won't get into at this time. But the fact that there were this is all, and anybody from Tudor Place will tell you, this is all they knew about her. They knew that her name was Stacia, and she had a sister named Brit and a sister named Elizabeth, and that Elizabeth ran away. And that is all the interpretation that they had, everything that they knew about her. So long story short, it's actually just that an initial, that there wasn't more said. Right. The reduction. Absolutely. Yes. You're welcome. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a great question. So the question is about, where Anastacia, the obituary makes it sound like that Anastacia was on the property or very near the property, living in the house almost immediately before she was placed in the home. Me and Rob and Sarah and Amy and all the folks from Tudor Place have gone back and forth on this. The way that it's written, makes it sound like she perhaps after she was not living kind of in what I would call like rental houses in the 1870s, that perhaps she did come back to Tudor Place. There is nothing in Britannia's account books to suggest that she was a servant. She wasn't being paid wages. So the only payments that we know of that happened with Anastacia is Britannia gave Anastacia $1 on Christmas of 1874. And then the only other payments that I've been able to find in her account books are those payments in 1892. So whether Anastacia directly was here in the years leading up to the time that Father Rockfort decides to put her in the colored home, I don't have a good answer for you. We have debated. We don't have an answer. It's hard to know because it's not reflected in Britannia's account books. But that doesn't mean that she was not living somewhere on the property. There's also a very interesting clue, too, in that second reminiscence or second diary entry from Marquis Williams, where she says the getting to her abode was difficult. And to me, I don't have an answer for this either. What is her abode? Is her abode Tudor Place? Is her abode a cabin on Tudor Place's property? Is it in the African-American settlement that was just up here called Lee Hill? Unfortunately, haven't found anything in the archival records to give us an answer to that. A little bit about Father Rockfort. His name was Aloysius Rockfort. He was a reverend and a minister at Georgetown, and he founded something called the Peter Claver Beneficial Society. So Peter Claver is the patron saint of enslaved people. He was I can see some faces. It's a very interesting thing. In my I have a biography online that has a citation. There's an author who does an amazing analysis of this like patriarchal kind of thing with Peter Claver, but he was basically a 16th century priest who was canonized in the 1800s, and he went to South America and preached and converted indigenous and Portuguese, Brazilian enslaved in Brazil and in South America. But so this, he names this beneficial society, this organization to help free and formerly enslaved African Americans in Georgetown. He calls it the Peter Claver Beneficial Society. So that's where that name comes from. Like I said, it does imply that, Father Rockfort had to make a decision to move her because of whatever might be happening at Tudor Place or at her private home. We don't know. So I wish I had an answer for you, but I'm still looking. Yes. Oh, yes. Go ahead. So this is a lovely question. Okay, so I have been to Holyrood once. Her gravestone and the gravestone of the Peter Claver Beneficial Society of Tabitha, they are not marked. It is my dream one day. I would love to get, Holyrood is owned by Georgetown University. So one day I would love to get a marker, if anything, just to memorialize the African Americans who are buried there. Obviously, specifically Anastacia and Tabitha would be fantastic as well. So the plat books for Holyrood are at Georgetown University. She is buried in a specific lot and plot, which has been extremely difficult to map out because a lot of the headstones are no longer there. And so it's been hard for me. I've been one time and I tried to walk it. But Father Rockfort bought a plot for people who were members of the Beneficial Society to be buried there, but it's not marked. And it's hard. It's very difficultly laid out. In the same vein, Tabitha Hepburn, her sister, who was buried 6 years before her, is also in Holyrood. But that section, because it was for African Americans, also is not marked. So it's going to take more research. But I hope to one day, gather enough support to get something, marked there. Yes. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Earlier on, when she was young children, would she have lived in the house?
Yes.
I think there was some archaeology
Yeah. 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 So what we're doing is one thing to consider about slavery in Georgetown is this is slavery in an urban environment, right? So it's not like being in Virginia in the country, or in Maryland, which is where the Peters had like a farm, several farms, things like that. We're talking about slavery in an urban environment, right? So where we wouldn't have I know that archaeology has been done, and there was a cabin, what might be the remnants of a cabin, and some artifacts, a bead, and things like that, which were found in the southern part, or east garden. Thank you. I am so directionally challenged. You can ask my husband in the back. So, and remember too that obviously the property almost did at one time go all the way up to P Street. So, as far as I understand, as a nurse and as someone who would have been responsible for the children 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365, she would have lived in the house. Now, did she have her own room in the house? She did not. What we know and what we understand about enslaved people who live in urban environments is that any place they could put a cot, whether it's a dormer, a closet, a crawl space, that's where they slept. Anastacia did not have a dedicated room. As you can tell kind of from some of these reminiscences, it sounds like, if the children were ill, she put a cot in their room. But other than that, she would have been out of sight wherever she could put a cot down for the night. In those crawl spaces in the house. This is what I found also at Evermay down the street. I worked for them as well. And we know that they were just in the empty spaces in the house wherever they could fit. And that's a very difficult thing to kind of consider, their comfort was not considered for sure. Rob? Yes. Sure. Oh, my thoughts about Charity Hepburn. Okay. So I hope that I will be back to talk about the larger Peter enslaved community. Me and a colleague of mine who I believe is on this call, shout out to Molly Kerr, who is watching at home. We recently published an article with the Journal of Slavery and Data Preservation analyzing Robert Peters' enslaved holdings. So Robert Peter was Thomas Peters' father. Robert Peter was the first mayor of Georgetown. At his death, there were over 200 people enslaved to him. We have recently come up with, right now, just enslaved to him over the course of his lifetime, we are up to probably 350 or 400 people uniquely enslaved to him. He is one of the largest enslavers in Maryland at one time. No one has ever written about him ever, never written a book, nothing. So Molly and I are on a course correction to fix that. But Robert Peter has an enslaves a woman, that is not the proper language, enslaves a woman named Charity Hepburn, named Charity in his townhome. She is enslaved in Georgetown, in the 1790 document that we have for Robert Peter. And then again, in 1807, she is in Georgetown. So Robert Peter's townhome is now where Grace Episcopal Church is. Sorry, our remote doesn't work. Okay. So Robert Peter townhome down on the canal now, where he had a warehouse. That is now the site of Grace Episcopal Church. So his home is no longer extant. But that was his townhome. Anyway, so Charity was there, we believe. He also owned Peter's Square, which was like 70 different lots, which he was developing in the 1790s. So it's possible she was in and out. Anyways, Charity died in 1859, and she is also in the Sacramental Registers for Holy Trinity Church. She is old enough to have been Anastacia Elizabeth's and Tabitha's mother or her aunt. Unfortunately, Molly and I have not been able to connect Charity to the births of those daughters, if they are her daughters or her children or her nieces. But we personally believe that because enslavers did not generally move people. At least Robert Peter didn't. Robert Peter did not move people among his plantations, which he had 7 in Maryland and in DC. Well, what is now DC, Georgetown. Charity never leaves Georgetown. So the idea would be that she had her children here. They are trained in the way of working in a townhome and being a nurse to children, young children, and that they come to Tudor Place once the house is finished in 1815. Charity's also registered in the Census Society. And like I said, her death is also commemorated or recorded in the Sacramento Death Register as well. However, in 1859, the entry for Charity Hepburn does not indicate that she's enslaved to the Peters. It just refers to her as a Black woman. So we don't know. We're working on it. I hope that she is their mother. That would be wonderful to, give her parents and her sisters, to give her mother and be able to make that connection. But we're working on it. Yes, in the back there. Yeah.
Can you remind me, is Tabitha, did she pass away in a short period of time after she delivered?
Yes. Yeah.
You don't want to infer anything, certainly, but.
Yeah. So William is born in 34 and Tabitha dies in 38. But it doesn't, it does not mean, there's no telling. Unfortunately, there's not enough evidence. I personally believe that because William and Benedict, who was Anastasia's son, I personally believe that they were probably sickly when they were born. Infant mortality at this time is outrageous. I am working on a transcription of the Georgetown Sacramento registers because I'm crazy. I don't know. But they are so rich. They are so amazingly rich. And the number of infants who are being recorded as having passed, they're being baptized and then passing away, leads me to believe that it was probably the same thing with William and Benedict, that maybe they just had been sickly and they were baptized and then maybe died soon after. I don't know that for certain, but I have not found them in any other records. Yeah. So unfortunately, obviously we don't know what Tabitha passed from. But she was only 26. And we don't know the father, her partner, either. Yeah. So, you had a question, Robin? Yes.
You said that you weren't able to trace who wrote or published Anastasia's obituary.
Oh.
But the prominent mention of the Kennan family in the first 3 lines.
Yeah.
Might be a clue, I guess. What publication was it in?
So it was in the Evening Star.
In the Evening Star.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if I had thought that perhaps it was one of the nuns, possibly, or someone close. It has to be someone intimately. No, it's very specific,
Rob can correct me. Didn't Agnes write the obituary for John Luckett? Could she have been? She would have been at Tudor Place during that period of time.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. A comment on possibly Agnes, whose surname I don't know.
Well,
Agnes Peter. Yeah.
Peter, you know,
Too young to write. Yeah. It's such a specific, unusual obituary. It is so specific and unusual. Yeah. So yeah, my original thought was that it was a nun or someone who took care of Anastacia. It's also kind of this thought is just occurring to me now. It's kind of also self-serving to Father Rockfort, Aloysius Rockfort. who I don't know much about. Unfortunately, his papers do not survive at Georgetown, and I have looked in every newspaper I can possibly find. And there's not too much about him. The Peter Claver Beneficial Society actually folded about a decade after Anastacia passed away. He did not have the funds to keep it going. But yeah, so it's such an unusual obituary. I do not, and I also don't know like why they've decided they were going to include, I mean, it's obviously racist, but, including the remarks about her features and things like that as well. But it had to have been someone intimately known to her, Yes.
Was it normal or regularized to have obituaries published now at this given time of all people of any color?
So not necessarily. A lot of the times this is a very much like an old Southern sympathizer, family servant, pedantic kind of like way of memorializing formerly enslaved people, right? This is kind of very like an old South kind of paternalistic way of kind of memorializing the old family servant, right? So it's certainly not common in Virginia. It's not particularly common in DC that I have found. In my new job in Newport, Rhode Island, it's very common, but those people were free many, I mean, gradual abolition is passed in 1784. They're free for a much longer period of time. Honestly, what I've seen with these obituaries kind of in Georgetown is, and in Virginia, is if they are connected to a white, wealthy family, you may get an obituary, but again, it's self-serving to the family, not necessarily to the deceased individual. Yeah. And I left this out, but you know what? I'll tell you about it. Because I didn't put it in the slide. But for all of we wouldn't know about kind of Anastacia and her, later life at Tudor Place if it weren't for Marky's kind of like diary entries and things like that. But in one of her diary entries, which I did not include, Marky refers to Anastacia as the poor old creature, which is also just horrifying. And again, reflects this kind of like not seeing her as a human being, not having respect for her, not respecting her as an elder, not seeing her as an equal, things like that. So these are all kind of very difficult things to traverse because it's a double-edged sword, right? If we didn't have what Marky wrote, we wouldn't know anything. But at the same time, we have to take into account how Marky regarded Stacia, and that was not as, her equal. Yes.
Circling back to a prior comment about Tabitha's son William and the fact that no father is listed. However, Benedict's parents are both listed. Does that indicate anything to you in particular in terms of how common it is that a father is named in such documents, and if there are any conventions for not naming a father for any particular purpose?
Yeah. So in the sacramental registers, the birth sacramental registers, it's very common to see a father and a mother listed. Tabitha is, I was surprised to actually not find a partner listed for Tabitha. And there are a myriad of reasons, I think, why this could be. I think the number one reason is that that information was just not provided to the minister who took it down, the reverend who took it down. Now, in a greater sense, slavery-wise, slavery is matrilineal. So this goes, back to 1662. The first law is passed in 1662 in Virginia, saying that the status of the mother is conveyed to the child when born. So to that particular minister, perhaps they didn't write it down because it wasn't pertinent, because what they needed to know is that the child of Tabitha and ultimately the child of Anastacia were the property of the Peters. So the father does not matter in this sense. So why Tabitha's partner's name was left out, I don't have a good answer for you, except to say that slavery is matrilineal and that minister may not have written it down because it ultimately didn't matter. I got you, Rob. I see you in the back. Why Samuel's name is recorded with Anastacia, I don't know. A very interesting thing about Anastacia and her married status is in the censuses, on her death record, she is always marked as single, and which is a very different meaning than widowed, married. Single implies that she's never been married. There's never a mention of any children. For a time, I had this idea, which has been blown out of the water because I found that Anastacia gave birth. But at this time, I thought there was a time where, talking to friends, one of my friends who's in the audience now, who's Catholic. I am not Catholic. So this has opened my eyes. I thought that perhaps Anastacia, in order to serve her faith, best serve her faith or embody her faith, stayed single and maybe consecrated her, like took an oath of consecration to herself, right? That she would kind of live a consecrated life. Well, that does not necessarily jive, with her having a child and having a partner, but it's possible it could have been later in her life that she decided to do this. So this is, one way to kind of think about her being Catholic. But then I realized it's probably not true, at least as far as I know. I'm doing more research on that. Rob, you had a question in the back. Yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. Oh, the question from Rob is with Tabitha not having a father listed or a partner listed, whether the father is white. 100%. Absolutely. The father could be white. 100% that she could have been raped. Absolutely. We certainly know that there is white Peter lineage and other enslaved families at Tudor Place. So this would not be out of the ordinary for the Peters, and indeed pretty much any white enslaving family in this country. Yeah, absolutely. Those things are definitely possible for sure. Yes.
One more follow-up.
Yes, please.
I'm so interested.
Yes.
So, in those records, birth records, so it doesn't say the race of the child, or is there a time when they start to do that?
No, so they
will say,
yes.
this woman had a mixed race son.
Yes.
And it doesn't say who the dad was, because it might have been the plantation owner or the slaveholder, that, that person wasn't going to be named.
Right.
It does say this black woman
Right.
has this mixed race son, Nula. So you know very clearly something happened.
Yes. So the birth registers, so there are birth, death, and marriage registers that are in the Holy Trinity Church collection. They are a gold mine. Depending on the minister or the reverend or the scribe who is taking the records, sometimes they denote race and sometimes they don't. I will say, I was an archivist for Fairfax Court for 9 years, and there are so many surnames in these registers that I know that these are Black families, and they did not mark that they were slaves, Black, Negro, whatever the phrase they wanted to use. So in some sense, that reflects kind of what I have learned about Catholic. The Catholics, and I am not Catholic, so please give me some grace on this. But Catholics are really striving to save and preserve the soul of people, right? Race, class, sex does not necessarily matter. They are after saving your soul, right? That's what Catholics strive to do. So that could be a reflection of that, that race did not matter to them. They didn't write it down. Some of the entries are in Latin, which I do not read. So Google Translate has been amazing because I've had to translate these Latin births and deaths and marriage records. But they do use the term Negro, mulatto sometimes. And then there are definitely Black people, Black families who they don't denote, but I know that those are Black families. So that made me more of a commentary on how Catholics view enslaved and free people, or, you know, I haven't quite figured it out because it depends on the hand. Like the hand is very different. You'll even notice even on this page, there are so many different hands writing, taking the records, that it really is up to the person who's writing it. Mary Beth Corrigan, who's the archivist there at the booth, and she's the Black history and slavery archivist for Georgetown, will tell you that it's very hit or miss. More hits than misses, though, which is amazing for genealogy research. Yes. Sure. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So they don't use the word mixed. Mulatto. So, correct. Yeah. So, as you can see here, they say colored. But throughout the records, the term mulatto is used. And mulatto had a different legal connotation, had a completely different legal implication than an African or a Black or a quote unquote Negro. So in Virginia in particular, just very quickly, mulatto people in Virginia and Maryland and Georgetown were children born, at least at this time, have grandparentage that are of African descent. Now, before the Revolution in Virginia, you were considered mulatto if your mother was Black and your father was white. This is a legal implication whereby basically what happens is if you are born to an enslaved mother or a Black mother and a white father, white men petitioned Virginia state legislature in the 1750s saying that it is cruel and unusual, those are their exact words, cruel and unusual to keep the child of a white father enslaved for their entire lives. So in 1752, what happens is they say, actually it's a little earlier than that, it's in the early 1700s. They say, okay, children born to Black mothers, enslaved mothers, and white fathers will be free at the age of 31. In 1752, this age is back down to 21 for boys and 18 for girls because they say it's cruel and unusual to keep them enslaved. So having a mulatto status has certain legal implications for whether you will ever be free. Before, in Virginia in particular, which would have applied to the Custis Estates and the Washingtons, before the Revolution, a person could not free someone by will. You could not write in your will, I would like my enslaved person to be free. You had to petition the governor. This is why it's called an emancipation, because it's a government act. Up until the time of the Revolution. After the Revolution, in 1782, there is an act passed whereby you can now free enslaved people by will or by deed, which is now where we get the term manumission. And so, again, having to do with these certain legal implications depending on what someone decides your race is, right? After the Revolution, mulatto kind of goes away. It does not matter whether you are born to an enslaved mother and a white father. You can then be manumitted by your enslaver. And so there's really nothing even after, in Virginia in particular, there's really nothing after the Revolution that even talks about how mulatto is even really defined, except for by the time you get it up to this time period, it's grandparentage. So it's complicated. It's legal implications that are complicated. Yes.
So it seems like the leaders of kind of terrible record.
Yes.
Tends to be pretty good. And I have seen for other families records of payments made when emancipation happened. I'm just wondering if there's any record of who had been enslaved by the family at that moment.
Yeah.
Give you a little bit.
So unfortunately, Britannia Peter Kennan did not file a DC compensation act like form in 1862, which so the DC Compensation Act, happens in 1862. There's nothing in the Kennan, there's nothing under Kennan. So which is something that, again, me, Rob, people here have debated who was actually enslaved here. Was anyone actually enslaved here leading up to the time of the revolution, Civil War? Britannia and the Kennans did not have a lot of money by that time. Britannia was on hard times. And so she either didn't need the money or she didn't bother, or she didn't have anyone enslaved that she could claim. You got, if you don't know, so you could get $200 per enslaved individual in 1862 to free them. So Britannia never freed anyone. Now, I did find that there is a person who was enslaved to Robert Peter who had been sold to another individual in Georgetown, where it specifically says that I bought him from Robert Peter or from Thomas Peter in 1830, and then he is freed in 1862. So I've been able to find a Peter connection there, but nothing here at Tudor Place. I know it's a bummer because it's just another way that we can track individuals. I know we're running short on time. If anybody has any questions or comments, y'all are the first people to hear Anastasia's story. I have been so excited to tell this story, to tell her story. Feedback is appreciated. You can find me on LinkedIn. You got emails. You have my email, so let me know. So thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for attending. Again, this tonight's first lecture in this series. Thank you so much, Heather, for getting this lecture series kicked off with a remarkable woman who you've been able to track down so much information that we previously did not have. So archivists everywhere, rejoice. Thank you so much. Call out to Sarah in the back as well for our current Tudor Place archivist. Our next lecture will be on April 8th. Cassandra Good, professor of Marymount, will be talking about who are the Custis's. So giving a little bit more information on who the Custis's were and other individuals that they enslaved here at Tudor Place. Again, this lecture series is free. So if you'd like to donate to Tudor Place, feel free to visit our website. We do appreciate that. There's also a survey. If you haven't already picked it up, many of you have, thank you. If you can fill that out before you leave, that would be great. And again, thank you all so much for coming to tonight's lecture.